everybody, and welcome back to the Hot Seat with Holly Meginniss. As you know, I'm Holly Meginniss, and yes, we have a different setup today. Quick shout out to the Central Library in downtown Spokane. They have this great recording studio up at the top floor, level 3. KYRS is up here. There's a podcast studio, and then there's a studio where you can do video. So we are working from here today. Kind of missing some of our stuff. You won't see the no bullshit cut, but we will get it in there, I promise. So obviously we're starting the month of December. Everybody has mixed feelings about the holidays. So for this month, we're going to cover topics that can be very timely for the holiday season. And we're going to start off today with me telling you a story. So sit back, grab your hot cocoa, and let's go for a ride. The date was November 19th, 2016. I was 1 year into my career. Actually, just over, about 1.5 years into my career. I was working in private practice. I did everything backwards as far as my career went, but I was in private practice and it was a Saturday. So I was at work. I worked half a day on Saturdays. And I got a text just between patients. And the text read, "Dad is going to IU Med. There's a liver for him." Let me introduce you to my father. His name was Ken Moody, born in 1948. Missed the Vietnam War because he damn near died in a car wreck. And my story goes, my grandmother went before the draft board and showed pictures. He was a very flawed man, but a flawed man who knew it and eventually was able to take responsibility for it. He was beloved, and some people were very intimidated by him. And I smile because I wasn't. I was very much like him. I always say my resting bitch face came from him. Because when he looked, he could have a scowl on his face and there wasn't anything wrong with him. He just had a scowl on his face. He was funny. He loved to poke at you. He could also be a complete asshole. But can't we all? My father, as I mentioned, was in an accident before I was born. And I was born when he was 21 in 1969. You can do the math. What we didn't know then that we know now is he suffered a significant traumatic brain injury, or TBI. And upon leaving the hospital, because it shattered his face had to be rebuilt. We're talking about 1960s medicine. He just looked completely different. He went from an elongated, very handsome, chiseled face to a more round face. It's not that he still didn't look good. He just looked different. And recovering from that was hard, so he turned to alcohol. And alcohol became his best friend for a long time. And in my early years, he was a violent man. He put hands on my mother. I never actually saw him hit my mother, but he did a few things that I did witness, until one day I saw him do something that, had I not screamed, she would have been seriously injured. So they divorced. Mom remarried, then divorced. They got back together. And of course, by the time they got back together, they divorced when I was, I want to say 6, 7, and they remarried when I was like 8 or 9. So that's how quick that was. There was another brother born in there because I'm the oldest of 4. There's 3 younger brothers. So eventually they got back together. In the meantime, my father went to treatment, and this was 1970s treatment. So nowadays, when you have treatment for alcoholism, it's called medically assisted treatment. They use medications to help you go through the withdrawal process and get through those, so you don't end up having seizures, because alcohol is one of the most dangerous things to withdraw from. Back then, it was weaning them off. They'd get a certain amount of alcohol every day until they were weaned off. They couldn't have cologne. They couldn't have anything that had mouthwash, nothing in their rooms. And back in the 70s, they didn't make mouthwash. It was alcohol-free. But he did it. He did it in my hometown in Indiana. And let me tell you something. My maiden name is Moody. And if you're a Moody, you either know it. If you are not a Moody, you know a Moody, you married a Moody, or you are related in some way. I have family I don't even know about. That's not a joke. It's true. So anyway, we get to the second marriage. And before they get married, my father makes a statement to me. He says, Holly, the doctor told me I could never drink again, and if it did, it would kill me, so I'm never going to drink again. And I was thrilled. My dad was back. And for so many years, it went well. But like all alcoholic stories, there was a relapse. And my father did a few things he wasn't proud of. One of them being cheating on my mom. And the other thing that I've learned in my life very early was that my personality was a lot like my dad's. And by that time, I was a teenager. I was a late teenager. And I didn't have any problem letting him know exactly what I thought of it. I wouldn't stay in the same room with him. I heard him call me a bitch and I giggled. And it didn't bother me that he was upset. He needed to hurt as bad as he'd hurt me and my brothers and my mother. But they eventually divorced because he was starting back down the road of violence, which he only did when he was drinking. So he divorced. He and I worked on our relationship. I eventually realized that the woman he had been seeing made him happy. I'm not thrilled with the way he did it, but I can't hold it against her if she makes him happy. And so I was the maid of honor in their wedding. I owe her a big debt of gratitude, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. But things went on. I got married, my kids were born. We went back and visited. He was very proud of his kids. He was very proud of his family. Eventually, he was able to say all of his children had graduated from college, and that meant something to him. And he loved his grandkids. At that time, he had my 2 kids, and he had my brother's 2 kids. And he was very proud of all of us. When he turned 62, which would have been, I have to think it through, in the early 2000s, he was given the opportunity to retire early. Now, my hometown is famous for something. It is the casket capital of this country, as well as the hospital bed capital of this country. Hill-Rom, which if you've ever watched Grey's Anatomy or any kind of medical show, you'll see that sign on the end of the bed. And that is probably built in my hometown. On the other side of the street, we have the casket company, Batesville Casket. If you've ever picked out a casket for a loved one or an urn for a loved one, that's the company. So my father worked for casket most of my life. There's a short time where he was a cabinet maker, but for the most part, he worked at casket, and he worked his way up. He was in junior management. He was out of the factory by the time he was given the opportunity to retire early so they could lower their workforce by attrition. So he did. He was excited. My dad was an incredible baseball player, almost played pro, which also made him, and I believe this theory to be 1000% true, an incredible golfer. He was going to get to go play golf with my brothers, who 2 of my brothers very much enjoyed playing golf, and they all played together. Except he tore a bicep. not long after that. And as they were checking on him, they discovered his liver was failing. And that was not good. So we dealt with it. All of us kind of held it in our heads that this could go seriously sideways. But Dad hit the ground running. We also knew there could be some big hurdles about him getting a liver transplant if he needed one, because he was an alcoholic. The injuries to his liver had been caused by his use of alcohol. So for you to get a transplant of a liver, you have to not go through drug treatment once, you go through it twice. You have to say, they say jump, you say how high. On my 40th birthday, my dad used to call me every year on my birthday, and he could shoot the shit better than anybody. You know, earlier in my 30s, one time he asked me what I wanted for my birthday, and as a kind of a lark, I said, I'd love a dozen long stem roses. And he started sending me roses every year on my birthday until he retired. And that meant so much. He used to say, because some man in your life should. He wasn't real fond of my husband. But on my 40th birthday, he called and he goes, you're old. And I was like, dude, you're farting dust, okay? And all of a sudden he says, I'm sorry. I'm like, for what? You know, that conversation we'd had when I was a child was long past gone. He said, I made you a promise and I broke it. And it stabbed me in the heart. But it also took away for all the aggravation we'd given each other, for all the anger we'd had towards each other, for all of it, it was gone. He owned what he did. How can you hold that against him? He also eventually did that with all of my brothers, which I was so proud of him for. My dad wanted to become a drug and alcohol counselor before everything went a whole different way. So back to November 19th. He was not in good shape. The last coherent phone call I'd had with him, and he'd never done this before, but he said, I want to ask you a favor. I said, sure, Daddy, what? And he said, I want you to call me more often. And that shook me a little bit because I think he knew things were bad. The last phone conversation I had with him, he really couldn't talk to me. He was so out of it. When your liver's failing, ammonia builds up in your bloodstream. There were so many things that were done. He was in a bad way. And I was starting to prepare myself for the idea that organs are scarce. He might die from this. And then November 19th, 2016 happened, and I get a text. He's going to Indianapolis, Indiana. There's a liver for him. And I was floating. I was so excited. I could barely focus on the next session I had to do. My boss happened to be in that day and was seeing patients, and I was floating. My dad was going to get his shot. He was going to get a liver transplant, and it was going to be okay. Everything was going to be okay. So I got done with work, and I'd been told the surgery would last between 6 and 8 hours. 6 hours rolls around. My brother says they haven't come out and updated. 8 hours rolls around. No update. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 hours later, they finally brought him out of surgery. The doctor said when they opened him up, they had more scar tissue there than they could see on the MRIs and the CT scans. They had to work to stop the bleeding and try to get the liver to function. The liver was only functioning at 10%. They did not expect him to survive. In that moment, I lost my mind. All three of my children were there. They had never heard me wail like I did that night. They never heard me lose my mind the way I did that night. I couldn't help it. Then it was, after I had cried so many tears that I couldn't have any more, I don't even remember, but somehow I ended up in my bed. I know the kids were worried. So when the call came the following day that he never woke up from the surgery and that he had passed away, I knew it was coming. If you haven't figured out yet what our topic this week is, it's grief. Grief is really hard to deal with during the holidays, and it doesn't matter how long it's been. My father died on November 20th, 2016. 4 days before Thanksgiving that year. Things did not go the way I wanted them to as far as how things were planned, and I ultimately was not able to get there for his funeral. But I was okay with that because in the end, he knew how I felt about him, and I knew how he felt about me. There were no words left unspoken. It was a struggle, and I'll talk about it as we talk about the different parts of grief. But it's hard. So let's talk about it. And most people know grief as the 5 stages of grief, which was created by, I have my note cards here. I'm not going to hide them. I'll try to hide them. It was codified by a Swiss-American psychiatrist named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And she wrote a book in 1969 called On Death and Dying. She took a lot of the emotional turmoil that comes from grief and loss and turned it into something we could understand. A lot of people get into the idea that you go through the 5 stages of grief and then you're done. That is not how grief works. So the 5 stages of grief that she was able to identify were denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. First thing to notice, that's not linear. What is denial? It's not real. Someone's made a mistake. I went through that. No. Somebody screwed up. The doctor screwed up. Some of you won't know who I'm talking about when I say this, but Larry Hagman, who was a famous actor in the 80s, if you watch the show Dallas, he was J.R. Ewing. Or you watch the remake of Dallas, he was J.R. Ewing. Larry Hagman had a liver transplant because of alcoholism. He lived. David Crosby from Crosby, Stills and Nash, liver transplant because he had alcoholism. People don't die from a transplant. What are you talking about? That's supposed to be save their life. You start to think that they'll come back. You know? You have to start dealing with the idea you can't pick up the phone, that you can't call them. It's not real. And, you know, if you're suffering grief in terms of losing a job, it can be the idea of they'll change their mind. Or if it's in relationships, it's the idea of, oh, they'll come back. Because we grieve about a variety of different things. I'm talking about the loss of a parent, but we also grieve the loss of a relationship, the loss of a job, especially if we put a lot of years into it. And all of those things, particularly losing a job or a relationship, are they'll come back or they'll miss me when I'm gone. They'll call me. Then we get towards anger. Why me? Why did this happen to our family? Why didn't my dad? My dad was well liked. My dad did good things for people. Why was this? Whose freaking idea was that? He didn't deserve that. He was 68 years old when he died. I had to think about it for a second. Anger toward life itself. It isn't fair. This isn't right. Anger towards the person you lost, resentment. I went through that. There was a time not long after, in that first week or so, I was having these thoughts of, you son of a bitch. You broke your promise to me and look what you've done. You promised. You promised you wouldn't do this. And now you're gone. You're not going to be here for your grandchild's wedding. You're not going to be here for me. What the fuck? And then I felt guilty, because you may feel guilty too, which made the anger worse. He didn't want to die. He had an addiction. It's also important to remember that anger comes from pain. Anger in my business is considered a secondary emotion. It usually hides something. It's coming from something. A desire to control the situation. A frustration that you're feeling bad. Fear. Anger is usually a secondary emotion. Now, rage, that's a little different. But anger, it's usually frustration. But it's necessary. If we don't feel the uncomfortable feelings, we can't move through them. So why not feel it? Because it's scary too. It can, like I said, it can look like irritability, bitterness, anxiety, and it can look like rage or impatience. Somebody's got a short fuse. They just lost somebody in their life, and it's really hard, especially if it's a coworker or somebody you don't know very well, and you want to be supportive, but you don't have that kind of relationship with them. You don't quite know what to do. Then we go to bargaining. Never fails. Hold on to hope in a situation in an intense emotional pain. I did that night they said he was probably going to die. I just would not give up the idea that he was going to pull through. He's my dad. He wants to be here. He wants to see his grandchild get married. He wants to see me again. He wants to be with his sons. You might have the conversations that you would do anything and sacrifice everything if life was restored to what it was before the loss. I can say I felt that way. What if, or if only? What if I'd called one more time? What if only, what if I'd been able to talk to people at the hospital and help them figure out what was going on? I mean, I'm a social worker, but I could have done something. And I felt guilt. Even though my dad and I were good, I felt guilt for my brothers who had to deal with all of that. And my stepmother, who, by the way, that's why I held an immense amount of gratitude. Despite things that happened afterwards, she took care of him. And he was difficult. A lot of times because of the health issues he had, but it wasn't easy. She was watching her husband die. They had plans, and those plans were gone because of his health. Feel hard, but help you heal and confront the reality of the situation. It feels very hard, and you have to confront the reality of the situation. Depression. It is a natural an appropriate response to grief. Let's be very clear here. Grief is not, I repeat, not a mental illness. It is what happens because we're human. Now, it doesn't mean counseling can't be effective, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But depression is when you start facing the reality and the inevitability of that loss. Life is different now. He's gone. There's nothing left. I can't go see him. I can go see a grave, which I eventually did. And I also fell apart at. I fell to my knees at that one. I'm a little bit dramatic. I can't help it. May lead to intense sadness and despair. Every year he's been gone, I usually at one point or another, usually in the month of November, have what I call crying from my toes. I sob. And I have to, because then I can deal with it. Signs of that intense sadness and despair can be fatigue, confusion. You're not really paying attention to the world that's going on around you. You know, you're trying to start living life normally again, and it's not going well. You just don't have it to do it. Confusion, distraction. You're easily distracted. Loss of motivation, loss of appetite. This is a temporary and a direct response to the grieving process. Then we get to acceptance. Acknowledging the loss that has been experienced. Learning to live with a new normal. Might feel comfortable reaching out to friends, but prefer to withdraw at other times. If you're struggling, and what does struggling look like? Well, you can't get back to work. You're finding it difficult to go back to work with daily life. You aren't taking care of yourself. You're not giving yourself the opportunity. You're not giving yourself permission to go back to living your life. That's where grief counseling can be really helpful. Again, it's not because you have a mental illness. I have had the heartbreaking honor of doing grief counseling before. I had a recent one where it was a sudden loss of a fiance. And it was just moving through the grief and giving them a safe place to talk about it and understand it and be able to start to live their life again and enjoy the memories they had, the joy. And yes, the sorrow is there. But the other part of that is, what do you do if there's somebody in your life who's grieving? How do you help? Hold space. Don't try to solve it. We all want to fix, especially when it's somebody we love. You know, I know particularly with one of my kids, they wanted to fix it. They wanted to make it better. They wanted to, we always want to fix it. Don't. Just hold space. Yes, it might make you uncomfortable. Yes, it might make you cry too, but it is the most cherished and valuable thing you can do with someone you care about. Allow that person you care for to feel and not worry about your discomfort, because it will pass. It's a heartbreaking honor when somebody feels safe enough to talk to you about that. To talk about their frustration, to talk about the emotions they're processing. They don't choose just anybody. They trust you when they do that. Cry with them if you need to. It's okay. Never a big deal to do that. Again, I want to emphasize, grief is not linear. And it gets very hard around the holiday season. Traditions, things that you did as a child, things that you did. I remember one year for Christmas, and understand I'm a child of the 80s. I wanted the Michael Jackson Beat It jacket, and I also collected dolls, so I also wanted the Princess Diana in her wedding gown. I was told I could have one or the other. My dad made sure I got both. And lots of other memories like that, you know. He was a good man who I loved very much, who my mom struggled with and would use in anger, would say, "You're just like your father." Until one day I said, "Yes, I am. I am a take no prisoners kind of person." My dad didn't take a lot of people's bullshit. My dad wasn't, I have my mom's boisterousness and my dad's attitude. My dad, it was very, you know, as a leader, he was a servant leader, which I learned kind of came to me instinctually, but also learned in college. He was beloved by his family. You know, he's the oldest boy. He had one older sister. It's important to understand that while grief is not linear, as we move into our no bullshit corner, and yeah, I forgot the cup, so let's pretend it's right here. Grief is not linear. It can come and go in any order for a long time. Some years, that date, I'm okay. I have this inner dialogue with him. I also think he gets into my playlists. My dad was a country music fan, big country music fan, cry in your beer kind of country music. And there was a song that when I was little, he would dance with me to. And it was an old Charlie Rich song. And it was called "The Most Beautiful Girl in the World," because I was his only daughter. We used to listen to Larry Gatlin. So if that pops up, if Tim McGraw's "Live Like You Were Dying," which will always trigger the cry from your toes. It is not easy to lose somebody, but it does get easier. It does get easier to hold them in your heart. Hold those memories close to you. Put those memories in a journal. There is a point where it can be a problem. That is when, I have to relook at this real quick. If you feel that you are not moving through grief and are feeling extreme depression, seek help. If you have someone in your life who is still in the early stages of grief, still not able to function, still not doing that, then we do need to see them as mental health professionals, because that is a problem. It's called prolonged grief disorder. Understand, feeling those feelings is normal, but not moving through the stages becomes an issue. If a child is struggling in the early stages for 6 months, or an adult is still struggling with it a year later, get some mental health help. But also, don't be afraid to call a mental health professional. Just say, "Hey, I need grief counseling." It's usually short. It's as long as you need it. And I want to close with a really cool quote. And I think I forgot to put it on here, but I remember it. Comes from a very great woman who led a lot of people through history, and they called her Queen. Her name was Queen Elizabeth II. And she said, "Grief is the price we pay for love." And my friends, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Thanks for watching. Before we finish, I want to give you a quick heads up. We're working on a new show where we want to use viewer questions. So please send your viewer questions to production@arucreative.com, subject line "questions for the hot seat." And we'll put them together and I will answer your questions. No question is stupid. You can ask questions about Therapy, you can ask questions about if you're not comfortable with the therapist, how to break up with the therapist, what you should expect from your therapist, anything. Relationships, you name it. We'll do the very best we can to answer those questions effectively. Thank you all. Hopefully this wasn't too triggering for you, but something you can use to help you move through the loss and the love. See you next time.